Simeon, the new theologian, new as in like the year 1000, once wrote, "Keep your attention within yourself, not in your head, but in your heart." And it was the mantra, really, of the Eastern Church for centuries. And it became reduced to kind of a phrase, "You must learn to see with the eyes of your heart." In 6 days, it will be Passover. And in 6 days, Jesus will die. But for this one evening, he's gathered around the table in the home of dear friends. He has been friends with Mary and Martha and Lazarus for almost his entire ministry. The bond only intensified after Lazarus died and Jesus resuscitated him from the dead. And tonight, he finds himself with his disciples, all of them gathered around the table. And Martha is offering wonderful hospitality, and Mary is there. And it seems to be a quieter evening. You know, lots of times the Gospels record all kinds of conversation Jesus has around the table, but tonight there's nothing noted. I would dearly love to know what Lazarus had to talk about. We don't know. And Mary seems to be quiet too. I don't think it's because she's a woman or meek around Jesus. She and Martha pretty much gave Jesus the what for when he showed up a little too late to heal Lazarus. And so I don't think that's their relationship. I think it's quiet because there's a gathering darkness in the story. It's right after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead that the authorities decide it's time for him to meet a sticky end. And Lazarus too, because raising someone from the dead is just a road too far to go. It's attracted too much attention. And so the authorities want to kill both Lazarus and Jesus. And that kind of darkness hangs in the air. And Jesus has begun to talk a lot about his coming death in ways the disciples don't quite understand, but it's all there. And so perhaps for that reason, perhaps for the gravity of the night, it's quiet. Or perhaps because that's the way it is with people you're deep friends with. The silence kind of holds you in a place of rest. And it's in that moment that Mary rises, and she leaves the room and she returns with a huge amount of perfume, kind of perfume used for burials. And maybe they bought it when Lazarus died. One would have had to anoint his body a significant amount. Or maybe Martha and Lazarus and Mary, they intuit something, and so they pull all their savings together and they go and buy this enormous amount of perfume. Or maybe it's been passed down because the wealth she holds in her hands is immense. And she walks over to Jesus and she spills forth the wealth extravagantly, pours it all over his feet. And she's not anointing his head in this gospel. This isn't about Jesus' kingship. She anoints his feet, a gesture that recognizes Jesus as prophet, who is going to walk a very difficult path. And this act it's beautiful and it's confusing as she wipes her hair all over his feet. And I think it's telling, though, that neither Martha nor Lazarus say anything. This is their family member. It's a kind of embarrassing moment. They might not have liked that, but it's clear that they trust her, or they trust Jesus, or they trust the present moment enough to let it be. But I wonder about the disciples. Are they confused? Are they aghast? And I have to think that more than one of them speaks when Judas decides to speak. He's kind of maybe speaking for more than himself. I'm aware of the gloss and Judas thieving and all those things, but these guys hardly ever get it. And this is an extravagant act of what appears to be waste, and a weird intimacy between Jesus and Mary that just wasn't like first century normal. And so Judas, out of whatever sense of confusion or real care about the poverty or misogyny or selfishness, says like, "What are you doing?" And Jesus shuts him down immediately and takes Mary's part. Because Jesus knows deep down what Mary's done for him. And Mary knows deep down what she is doing. And they might be the only two people in the room who understand what is happening. They might be the only two people who have moved from the head to the heart and see this for what it is. The deep symbol, the deep metaphor, this act that points to something deeper than itself, this almost sacrament. It is almost a baptism that prepares him for his death in the way that John's baptism prepared him for his life. And Mary somehow comes to a deep place where she knows or intuits what is going to happen. I have to imagine that after her brother died and is resuscitated, she spends a lot of time praying and pondering that. What did his death mean, and why is Jesus talking about Jesus' death? What does her brother's resuscitation have in common with Jesus talking about resurrection? How are those different? How are those the same? And Mary sat in her own silence long enough to come to this place where she knows that Jesus will die, and she knows that it won't be the end of the story. And so she decides this is the moment because she doesn't know how to put it into words. It's so deep within her that she can only enact this great sacrament, this great gift, this anointing. She sees with the eyes of her heart. Juxtapose that with poor Judas. Judas the zealot, he's driven by violence, he's driven by action, impatience of the moment, and he only sees with his eyes. And what he sees is wastefulness. And he can't help but cry out about it. He misses the beauty, he misses the metaphor. But I think he misses all that Jesus' ministry has been too, because it hasn't looked at it correctly. In fact, Jesus' ministry was never about tossing money at the poor. Jesus healed and he touched people. He spoke with them, he learned about their lives. The poor were never something to simply pour money upon. They were people to know. They weren't objects, they were subjects. And Jesus spent time getting to know them. And so Judas only knows how to use one part of his brain. He can only see what appears to be rational and linear, what he sees with his eyes. But maybe that's not the invitation. And maybe this extravagant act that Mary offers to us is a way of talking about seeing life differently, about having the attention drop from the head to the heart, to begin to see and engage reality from a different perspective. It doesn't invalidate our rational, linear, planning-oriented selves. That's important. That's a gift of God. But if we only stay on the surface of our life, and we only stay on the surface of ourselves, perhaps we miss the abundance and the beauty that God is offering to us. That we're invited to actually live from a deeper space, to see reality differently. And if the eyes of the heart isn't a metaphor that works for you, because we're talking about things that go beyond language, let me offer to you a few other things, because the great contemplatives and prayerful of our tradition have always pointed to this kind of depth. That this is what the journey is about. And you have Meister Eckhart talking about coming into the ground of your being. That in the deepest place, are we rooted in God, the soil of God? Is God birthing something within us? Maybe that doesn't work for you, so maybe it's Teresa, that we are all an infinitely beautiful castle. And as we go deeper into ourselves, into the inner rooms of the castle, in the center of that place, we find ourselves and we find God, and we realize that in that place they're the same. That God is never without us, and we are never without God. But it requires seeing in a different way. In the great phrase of Julian of Norwich, my favorite, living by yourself with a cat, the great phase of wanting with God. But you don't get there by seeing with your eyes, and you don't get there by rational thought. You have to stop living on the surface and trust that whatever you find within yourself, God is to be found there as well. And I don't want to push Mary's metaphor too far. I don't imagine we're going to sit in a room like she did with Jesus and to pour out perfume on someone's feet in the year 2022. I don't know what that gets us. But I do wonder this, that if we begin to see with the eyes of our heart, what is the beautiful, abundant, extravagant thing we're invited to be with God, that we're invited to do with God. Because I have no doubt each one of us is called to a beautiful, abundant space. But sometimes we don't see it because we only see on the surface. And so I think this story teaches us about who we might be and what we might do and where God is within us. So, as our friend Simeon the New Theologian said a century ago, 1,000 years ago, keep your attention within yourself, not in your head, but in your heart, and learn to see reality from the eyes of